Welcome into the Blogger Bowl Tuesday, week 3 recap, week 4 early lines edition, whatever you want to call it. I am Matt Rockchalk Jayhawk Rooney. Phil Goff is joining me with producer Dan. As always, Dan, you're showing off the shirt. You also told us pre-show meeting you have a question for us, so let's just start it off with that.
Do you guys think that Marcus Freeman converting to Catholicism is the reason the Hail Mary didn't end up being completed at the end of that game?
Yes.
Is Jeff Wilcox Catholic?
Good
I think
question.
That's the question.
I
don't have time to Google that, and I don't think that would come up right away.
I don't know.
I would probably need that in order to answer the question. We could start with our Irish. I'm wearing my home field apparel Notre Dame shirt, by the way. Absolutely love this one. Think it came in really well. The beard kind of matches mine. Dan, go ahead. You got something?
Well, I was just gonna say I don't think we need to necessarily talk about that game. I had to ask the question because I needed to know. I also discovered today Josh Heupel is Catholic because I saw an article ahead of that game, and we're not going to get too much into this week's game other than lines, but it says Josh Heupel now has to perform an exorcism. So I had to look up to see if Josh Heupel was Catholic, and it turns out he is. So
my two teams' head coaches are Catholic. Who would have thought?
A quick thing. I think it was very strategic timing on Notre Dame's part to release that Marcus Freeman has converted to Catholicism, because nothing like injecting a little bit of Catholic guilt into the fan base for absolutely ripping the head coach last week. It's like, all right, you know what? He's a Catholic just like us.
He's one of us now.
So I think probably a lot of Notre Dame fans went to reconciliation after they got their anger out of their systems after last week, and then prayers were answered by a failed Hail Mary. So,
after prayers were answered after failed Hail Mary after like 3 or 4 plays in a row on the final drive where they probably should have won the game already. And then we get the just idiotic targeting penalty, the fumble, incompletion, whatever you want to call it, that happens to go Cal's way. And then like that was probably the only way they could win that game, though. They won it like 4 different times, but it still went to the last play of the game. But
one last God comment. Marcus Freeman said, saying like, what were you doing during the last moments of the game? He said that was a conversation between me and God. And I guarantee he's like, God, listen, I just converted to Catholicism for you with my whole family. Like, you got to give me this. You screwed me over winning the game 2 to 3 times already. Just give me this one.
He's got a big family, too. He's got 5 kids. Like, that's not a small family to be converting.
Yeah.
Or was it more than whatever? It's a lot.
That's maybe 6, but, prayers up.
There you go. You guys want to launch into – I just kind of put them in order of when they happened chronologically, the games we talked about last week. We can launch into it if you guys want to, or is there anything else you want to get off your chest before we launch into the games this week?
Just glad to be on the board. Glad the Irish are on the board.
There you go, Irish. A big win for them. We'll briefly talk. I'm basically now going forward probably putting both of our teams on our list of games every week because
they're just going to be because they're our teams and we're going to talk
Texas
about it.
doesn't play really any cupcakes, and Notre Dame by and large their schedule is pretty good. I don't know off the top of my head, but we'll talk about that a little bit later. But we'll start with Big Noon Saturday. Oklahoma 49, Nebraska 14. I'm done talking about Nebraska unless we're betting on Nebraska. I will say one thing that was very important for people to learn from this game, which is don't overreact to the scripted drive to start the game. Teams are generally going to have their best stuff off the start of the game. And Chicago Bears. Hello, Chicago Bears. So don't if the scripted drive doesn't go well, that might be concerning. If the scripted drive goes well, don't worry too much about it. Oklahoma didn't. Nebraska gave up 300 passing yards to Northwestern, who very clearly is what we thought they were. They gave up 400 pass yards to an option a team that was an option team a year ago. The defense is a mess. They fired their defensive coordinator. Dylan Gabriel, 285 yards, 3 touchdowns. Could have had more if they didn't take their foot off the gas there. But I will say this, be wary because for some reason Kansas State is their boogeyman. So potentially a spot there. But I'm done with talking about this Nebraska situation. They're a complete and utter disaster. And unless we're betting against them, I don't want to talk about them anymore. So, Matt, your thoughts on Oklahoma and Nebraska?
I mean, Oklahoma they always look good under Lincoln Riley and explosive. But for the first time, and again, it's against a now what we're learning, pretty bad Nebraska team. Is Kansas State this week? Is that who they have this week?
Yeah. In Lincoln.
I hate saying we're going to learn about them again because I think we did still learn something about them. I think we'll know for sure once they play Kansas State, but they established themselves in a way, like an identity that they never had under Lincoln Riley. The identity they had under Lincoln Riley was a little bit of front runners. We can put up a lot of points, and where things are going well, we're going to put you away. With Brett Venables, they looked like a physical team that kind of got in your face, that played defense and aggressively and physically for the first time in a long time. And now they have the offensive talent and firepower to go with it. I know we talked in the preseason show about how, Venables, will he get along with Jeff Lebby? Because, defensive-minded head coaches usually like the more conservative game plan guys. Man, I think, with their personnel, it goes perfectly with the Jeff Lebby offense. But I think Venables' tough, smash-mouth, in-your-face physical defense is pairing up absolutely perfectly with Lebby's offense, with the high skill, the high firepower. And that's a team that I looked at their playoff odds this morning at plus 500 to make it there. That looks like an impressive team, again, against another team that now we're finding out is very, very bad. They have some tests in the next coming weeks, but they looked more impressive in that team than they did in the previous two in that game than they did in the previous two against bad teams. They demolished Nebraska, and really, with the exception of a first drive that Nebraska scripted had perfect, was never in doubt. They were in complete control of.
Yeah, and I looking at this game, I had a couple of thoughts. You go into it and it's not like it was a dead environment. Like, it was a raucous environment to start the game. So it had a big game feel to it. So it's not like they were going in being like, we're going to roll over a bad team. We're going to go in, and everyone kind of had this circled as like potential upset game, potential interim bump. The first drive happened, and then they're like, you know what, after that, we're going to absolutely demolish you. And so a couple things really stood out to me is Dillon Gabriel is clearly looking good this year. The one thing that stood out to me is 61-yard touchdown run. Like, that was awesome. That's kind of an element where if he can do that, I'm saying not consistently, but pull off like kind of a big big run as we get towards some of these big games. I love Dillon Gabriel as my preseason Heisman sleeper. So I think his numbers are going to continue to climb. I don't think he's going to reach the Heisman. It just depends on how the end of their year goes. But I was just impressed by them. And so, again, they're playing a better team next week, but it's still the ghost of Nebraska with Adrian Martinez at quarterback for Kansas State. So I still think they're going to go, and I think with the more physical style defense, they're going to force Adrian Martinez to turn the ball over. We can get into that later, but overall, I'm really impressed with Oklahoma. And it's I don't know if it's more fun to watch because I loved the Lincoln Riley, like Oklahoma, like we're going to start collapsing at random points throughout these games, but then somehow win at the end. So I don't know if it's more fun, but if they're playing better football on both sides of the ball. And I'm a huge fan of Dillon Gabriel. And so I'm excited to see how he continues to progress and how the offense continues to progress. But as Matt said, it's like if they're playing like a physical defense, I think people have to do like the Tim Allen, like, whoa, like what? Oklahoma playing like physical good defense. So like I'm a big fan of what they're doing right now. And, honestly, I'm, curious to see how the rest of the way goes. But last thing, I don't want to talk about Nebraska ever again as well.
No, we're done. That's a hand up. That's on us. That's the last week was the last time we'll say anything nice about Nebraska.
Yeah, and like, okay, Oklahoma looked great. They really did. But, I mean, Nebraska's just looked slow, unathletic on defense. Like, and I don't know that Kansas State, other than like, hey, this is what they always seem to do against Oklahoma, is going to provide much of a test for them as well. But Oklahoma did what good teams, at least in theory, should do. They took on a bad team and kicked the ever-loving crap out of them. Speaking of that, I do want to put the Pac-12 games together, so let's go instead down to Auburn, where Penn State, I think, put forth a statement performance, 41-12 the final. I will start by saying I misread the Auburn situation. That is a program that is DED dead. Matt, your thoughts on what happened down on the plains at Auburn this Saturday?
Penn State just bullied them in just every aspect of the game, in the air, on the ground, defensively, offense. Like, it was just never really close. And even when the score was kind of close early, there wasn't really much doubt in it. Auburn's program is just in absolute shambles. I don't know if the buyout kicks in with Harsin soon. I don't really know how he survives that one, but he shouldn't survive very much longer. But I was impressed with Penn State. I was impressed with everybody not named Sean Clifford. I thought they all played. I'm joking with you, Phil. Sean Clifford played well. I still need to see him. When did they go to Michigan this year, right?
I believe so, yes. And I'm pretty sure that's already or about to be announced as a big noon Saturday.
Okay, that for me is they have Ohio State at home, I believe, and Michigan
they
there.
They do, and maybe a rant that I'll go on later at some point in this show is that I also believe that's a big noon Saturday game because I believe the whiteout game this year is Minnesota. Yeah, while you're going on, you keep going. I'll double check that while you're.
And I think also part of that is I think it's smart of them to not have whiteout games against teams like Ohio State, so they can actually win those every once in a while. Let's see. I got the schedule up here. Yeah, they have Michigan October 15th at Michigan in Ann Arbor. The next 2 weeks are Central Michigan, Northwestern, so they should very likely be undefeated going into that game. Phil, if he goes in there and wins that game, I will put my hand up about Sean Clifford and say I'm wrong. If he goes in there and plays well, I will not say I was wrong, but I might say that you were partially right. And if he goes in and face plants, I will probably gloat. But that still, for me, is the ultimate test for Sean Clifford. They went in and they beat up and they kicked the ever-loving crap out of a bad Auburn team. And I left that game very impressed. And Auburn, just exact opposite. That program is circling the drain. They need to do something fast, and they need to get the right guy in there at the right time. Not sure who it is, but they need to find him.
Phil, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, what I'm most impressed with, again, I joke about Sean Clifford. I think what he has to be this year is a glorified game manager, and then make some big plays in some of the big games, because who they're led by is freshman running back Nicholas Singleton, who, if you haven't watched him, again, he's
very
a guy
good.
Notre Dame. He's very good. So Notre Dame desperately want him. All signs are pointing for him to sign Notre Dame. He may have given a soft verbal at one point to go to Notre Dame. So he's someone who obviously he had my eye on, because once you lose a guy who's going to like Notre Dame, it's like you have a little space in your heart for him. So I was excited to see how he did in this like quote unquote like big environment, because what did he do? He put up like 125 yards rushing. So he looks really good. And so the fact that they have a freshman running back who's starting to emerge as one of the top freshman running backs in the country behind a pretty solid offensive line with the veteran quarterback, like this team has the makings of a very good Big Ten team this year, where they're going to win the games they should win. And again, Auburn, I had a feeling that the stadium would be dead, people would die, and I didn't think they would look quite this bad or quite this deflated, but it's clear that the fans want to pack their bags and wait for a new coach to emerge, because at this point you can't host a non-Ohio State, non-Michigan kind of middle-ish of the road Big Ten team to SEC country and just get your dicks kicked in, because that's at the end of the day what happened here. So it's a sad day for Auburn fans, but I think they're looking ahead. And for Penn State, I think you have something here. You have Central Michigan, you have Northwestern coming up. So a couple of like letdown-ish potential games before you get into the thick of their schedule. But again, I'm glad that Penn State is looking better this year, because then you look at some of the matchups of the top teams in the Big Ten, and it looks like we could potentially get some good games coming up.
It looks like this is a program that's finally over. COVID took its toll. They had a new OC last year. Clifford was hurt. Everything's kind of coming together for that program right now. Say what you will, but Manny Diaz is a good defensive coordinator.
Oh, yeah.
I was listening to a conversation, and I think was an interesting one. I think a fair conversation. How many teams would be ranked or would be favored over Penn State on a neutral field right now? The number's probably pretty small across the country. The problem for them is that two of them are in their division. So that's going to be something that they're going to have to overcome. You mentioned Singleton. He was the number one running back recruit in the country, clearly showing why he outplayed Tank Bigsby. They ran for 245 yards as a team, 6.3 yards per carry. Sean Clifford's number didn't pop, but he was 90th percentile or above in both EPA per dropback and yards per dropback. So he did what they needed him to do in this game, as you mentioned. They also had 3 interceptions, 3 forced fumbles, 6 sacks. You tell me a team that can run the ball is very physical. Their quarterback isn't going to play them necessarily out of the game, and they can dominate on the line, and the game would be at home. Sounds like a blueprint for the kind of team that has at least a fighting chance to maybe beat Ohio State this year, but a very impressive performance for Penn State on as far as I'm concerned. Moving on to the Pac-12, a double dip of huge results for that conference, starting out in Eugene, Oregon 41, BYU 20. Phil, what were your thoughts?
I mean, it's kind of like Oregon. It's almost like they had like a preseason game versus Georgia where they got absolutely dominated. They needed to get right week last week. And I know BYU was shorthanded, but again, it's a pretty veteran BYU team, and they looked good and they dominated this game from start to finish. I didn't think that they would score this many points at all, to be honest. But I thought that they were going to win this game. I thought they were going to cover. I bet on them to cover because this game was, at Oregon. I thought it was going to be a tough place to play, but it's kind of like, we don't necessarily know who BYU is, but I think we're getting a better indication of who Oregon is. And I think they're hopefully settling in And so, again, it's the type of team, if they can make a run now, that like first week on the road against SEC team with the first-year head coach in the first game, it's not something that's going to be held against them because Georgia is just so dominating right now. Again, I don't think they can make any big noise because I don't trust Bo Nix. He's still not turning into a really good quarterback. He's still just a very average quarterback at best. But at the same time, I feel like Oregon is very much, they're trending very much in the right direction now, which again, for the Pac-12, I think they needed that because if Oregon went there and got, lost at home versus a BYU team who's down some starters, it would have been a very bad look for the Pac-12. So this is a big week for the Pac-12, and some games we'll talk about later. But again, it's a good statement weekend-ish for the Pac-12 in general, which started with Oregon.
Yeah, I obviously none of us here are the biggest Bo Nix fans on this show, but I thought Oregon did a great job of game planning, not necessarily around him, but kind of for him to just manage the game. And they didn't ask him to do too much. They ran the ball really, really well. I think they had 3 guys averaging over 5 yards a carry. When you're able to run the ball effectively, that helps every quarterback, even more so the game manager types in Bo Nix. Bo Nix gets himself into trouble when you ask him to throw 35 times a game and make a bunch of decisions. He was 13 for 18, was incredibly efficient. They were able to run the play action off the run, which is huge for those guys. And I thought defensively, man, like BYU couldn't do anything on the ground. And then eventually they had to start throwing. And when they were able to, they racked up some pretty good numbers through the air. I think it was like 330 something yards passing, but that was more just because they were throwing a ton at the end of the game. And Oregon was up big, playing more bend, don't break, but they shut down the run. It was something like 64 yards on 25 carries or something for BYU. Oregon probably went into that game thinking we're going to shut down the run because the BYU was shorthanded on the outside at receiver, but they absolutely did that. And if you can stop the run and you can run the ball effectively, they're going to be able to play with anybody in that Pac-12 conference. So that's a team that's changed their narrative so much from week 1 till right now in such a short amount of time.
Yeah, Oregon's a good football team, point blank, period. Like all of the jokes after the Georgia game were funny, but like this is a good football team. So it was something during the Georgia game I kind of was thinking about when they were playing in the midst of it. And then I kind of got caught up in all of the jokes and everything about how things spiraled on them. But there's a guy, the Tailgate 10, I've brought him up a few times on the show. He's a pretty well-known college football handicapper. He gave out Oregon, and he brought this up, and he said 18 of their 32 plays in the first half against Georgia were positive, successful plays. They had 2 interceptions and a punt around midfield. So it's not like their offense couldn't move the ball at all against Georgia. There were some good things, but then bad plays happened and things spiraled out of control, which isn't to say that they are going to ever beat Georgia in any situation anywhere in the world. But as you mentioned, new head coach, tough environment to walk in. They give everything steamrolled on them and they got obliterated. But I mean, outside of that first tier of really, really good Georgia, Alabama, Ohio State, and maybe even like Michigan, like put them in that same category with a Penn State, a team who probably can beat anybody else in the country outside of that group. You did get the good Bo Nix experience. I would disagree with the statement. He's an average at best. I think he's maybe above average at best, but you never know. Like he's also can be very below average too, which you never know what you're going to get. But 5 touchdowns, no turnovers, 4.8 yards per rush. He was also good against play action again, which I mentioned. If they can run the ball and use play action, it's going to really open up their offense. And the BYU offense was shorthanded again without their top 2 receivers, but still 5.63 yards per play is a pretty good job against a BYU offense that can be very, very, very good. The other big Pac-12 game, Michigan State at Washington. Washington 39-28 winners in a game that was not as close as the final score would indicate. I talked about this last week, so I'll bring it up again. The Eckel rate, the quality possessions, Washington is down to 80%. So now only 4 out of 5 possessions they have are quality possessions. This is a team that is just going to put a lot of stress on opposing defenses every week. As someone who is very, very sentimental towards Indiana football, very happy seeing Michael Penix Jr. play at a level that, frankly, he's never played at before. Like, he was not this good at Indiana. And if you look at what Kalen DeBoer and Jake Haener did last year, there's no reason not to think that maybe the competition level will be a little bit higher in the Pac-12, but Michael Penix Jr. can put up huge stats this year, 397 yards, 4 touchdowns. The defense Still not great, but a lot of that is, again, game state dictated that Michigan State was just going to have to try to rally and throw the ball a lot. The concern I have about this Washington team, just 2.9 yards per rush, 22% of the runs were successful. If they are too one-dimensional, how is that going to bite them when they end up playing some of the better teams in their league? If anyone else can either put pressure on Penix or just for whatever reason it's not clicking, it's going to be difficult for them to really make anything happen. That said, what the hell was going on with Jimmy Lake in Washington while he was there? Like, the difference from one year to the next is absolutely stunning for this Washington program. And that the Pac-12, man, I think I put this in my notes later, but this is a league that may not have a great team. USC is, I guess, potentially the one who might be a great team. I'm still skeptical on that, but USC is very good. Utah is very good. Washington is good. Oregon is very good. And then Oregon State and Washington State have proven to at least be capable teams.
Tricky.
LA, I'm a little curious as to what's happening there. And then after that, okay, we're going to not really talk about a lot of what else is going on in that conference right now. But at the top, this is a very, very, very solid league. The problem, Utah losing that first game at Florida, to me, probably means there's too much attrition in this league for them to put a team in the playoff, which is unfortunate because there is good football being played in the Pac-12. Matt, your thoughts on Washington and Michigan State?
This was probably the game that I unfortunately watched the least of. I was at a wedding, so I didn't get to see. I watched some of the highlights, but was tracking, didn't get to watch it. But incredibly impressed with how quickly this Washington offense has turned around, and bringing in a guy like Michael Penix Jr., who I know was hurt and had that fun season in Indiana, but even wasn't all that impressive in the COVID year. I know they played well,
it was more big plays than stats.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. It was more of a moment type season than like, oh my God, look at those numbers. His numbers from Saturday night were, oh my God, look at those numbers. I'm a little bit disappointed by Michigan State. I thought they were going to kind of have a team here that, again, they're in that Big Ten East, and it is really, really tough to win that division when you have Michigan, when you have Ohio State, when you have Penn State. But I thought that might be a team that, bringing back a lot of veteran presence on offense. You have your quarterback back. Mel Tucker just signed a big deal. They're always able to run the football, it seems like, no matter who's there. They just kind of fell flat in a big spot. And that was a little bit disappointing for me. But to your point about the Pac-12, it's incredibly deep, and just about anybody can beat anybody on a given weekend, at least in that top half of the conference. So I'm very excited to see how this, the rest of this conference season shapes out and who ends up in that Pac-12 championship game, because I think it's going to be an absolutely wide open race. It's going to have a lot of jostling for position until week 12. I don't think we're going to have, or week 15. I don't think we're going to have two teams establish themselves right away and stay up there. I think you're going to see a lot of back and forth.
Yeah, and this is, for me, I joked last week, like the Michael Penix revenge game against the Big Ten. But it's clearly a situation where he had played good football at Indiana, but as you mentioned, it was more like people remember just that one diving touchdown that he had there.
Sick.
Which was sick. It was awesome. Don't get me wrong. It was awesome.
I also don't know if he was in.
He was.
He was. I'm going to.
I just felt like saying that. I think he was in too.
But I think the thing is here, it's you do, Dan, you brought up a good point. Like, what was Jimmy doing? Because it's not like there wasn't talent on that roster. It's not like they brought in a ton of transfers and are suddenly transforming this team. But they're playing really fast offense, and Michigan State looked like a slow Big Ten team versus a fast Pac-12 team. Almost like back in the day when, Oregon would play one of the Big Ten teams, and the Big Ten would be like, we've never seen hurry up before. We don't know what to do. We're completely gassed. And so it's them. There's something for me also flashy about having a lefty quarterback when you're moving quickly, just dice up the field.
And in those colors too, the purple and gold.
Yeah, big fan of purple, if you can't tell, with the Holy Cross Crusaders. First shout out of the day for them.
Second.
Probably second, maybe third. Who knows? But at the same time, it's not like he was wildly accurate during this game. If you look at his, I think he was, close, just 60%. So nothing wild, but his incompletions, he wasn't throwing interceptions. He's thrown 10 touchdowns and 1 interception this year. He's also spreading the ball around a lot. So it's not just they have one big playmaker. They have a lot of guys that are looking like this is like a fast Washington team. So again, I think in a league that we were all pretty down on, understandably so, it's great to see some good football being played out west because it makes the evenings more fun to watch the games. But also this race, as you mentioned, is really going to come down to the last couple of weeks here. So I'm absolutely jazzed up to see a Pac-12 league that, is not just someone who's going to have a consolation prize of someone playing in the Rose Bowl, but a bunch of teams who are going to be playing for potentially some New Year's Six bids. And depending on how the rest of the things shake out, I think with how good the league is, could have a shot at really getting a team in the playoff here down the stretch. And again, a lot of these games now are going to be super hyped up games, where otherwise I think before they were just kind of like games that we were maybe interested in, where now they some good game day potential back on the West Coast in the Pac-12, which I think is exciting for everybody because it's been sad, and it's good to have West Coast football back.
Well, you're not going to be able to watch most of those games because they're all going to be on the Pac-12 Network. Yeah. Or USC Oregon State on Saturday going to be on the Pac-12 Network. And then someone pointed out earlier today.
Someone find us an illegal stream for
that. Next week, the October 1st slate, which has a couple of good games on it, you will not be able to watch a Pac-12 game on a network that anybody has in the United States of America until 10:30 Eastern PM Saturday night, because all of the early games that day, including a very good one, there's an 11 a.m. Pacific kickoff in a really good game. I don't remember who it involves off the top of my head. So, I guess my last thought there before we move on to our last of the big games, is there going to be a bigger buyer's remorse situation in college football than this Mel Tucker contract at Michigan State? He got that contract. They got absolutely obliterated by Ohio State. Now they go out, they play another game against a good team on the road, and they get absolutely crushed. Hard to imagine. I mean, they'll play Michigan tough probably because I believe that game's in East. No, it's
in Ann Arbor this year. But they also seem to play Michigan in Ann Arbor tough.
Yeah, Penn State's better than they are. Michigan's better than they are. Ohio State's better than they are. They might be able to muck a game up and steal one somewhere. But, I mean, man, it seems like that might have been a little bit premature on their part to go out and offer all of that money to Mel Tucker.
It was probably a little premature and might have ended up being too much money. But, I do think he'll have some success there. And I think in terms of Michigan State, I think fan base the last couple of years got a little bit of too high of expectations. But I think kind of with where their program's at, with where they have been, it's going to be like every few years we're going to have a team that we think could win the Rose Bowl and we think can compete with Michigan State and Ohio State. And I think Mel Tucker is going to be – or Michigan and Ohio State, I should say. I think Mel Tucker is going to be able to do that. I don't think they're going to win a national championship, obviously, under Mel Tucker and probably ever. But, I still think he's a good guy for that job. And while they paid him a little bit more than they probably wanted to, I think that consistency with him there is going to help that program in the long term kind of be where Michigan State should, which is a team that challenges for a Big Ten every couple of years when they get, when they line their ducks up in a row.
And this is a tough stretch for Michigan State, though. It's like playing a pretty good Minnesota team, like a Maryland team that keeps winning, followed by Ohio State, Wisconsin, Michigan, and then an Illinois team that can, probably have a 17-12 somehow game with Michigan State. So this is going to be a tough stretch for Michigan State where they could find themselves losing 2 to 3 games. So it's it could be, Dan, I think we could see some super heavy buyer's remorse for the Mel Tucker situation pretty quickly if things don't go well, especially when you're looking at the Maryland and Minnesota games, because those aren't even quote unquote hard games, which at the beginning of the year, people probably just glossed right over. But turned out those are, 2 pretty solid teams right now who are absolutely not gimmies before they get into Ohio State, Michigan, and Wisconsin.
Yeah, I have some thoughts on Maryland coming up in a little bit as well, because they have an interesting game on Saturday. Our final of the big games this week in College Station, a rock fight if ever there were a rock fight. Texas A&M, a 17-9 win over Miami in a game that the Aggies absolutely needed to win. Matt, your thoughts on what transpired in College Station?
Again, this is another one that I kept track of, but at the wedding didn't get to see a ton of. But I don't know, it felt kind of boring. I don't think we congrats A&M, you got the win, and that's a nice win. You kind of needed to get it home, but I still wasn't all that impressed. I mean, Max Johnson comes in and they score 17 points, and they're able to run the ball a little bit, and their defense played very well. I guess that was the impressive part, but that hasn't been the problem. I still don't think we left that game learning a whole lot more about their offense and feeling a whole lot better about what they do offensively, because I mean, I guess it was a little bit better than the App State game, but it still wasn't all that good in my opinion. I still think they got a whole lot of questions to answer there.
Yeah, and I don't think, going out of this game, I really don't think that Texas A&M's offense is going to be good enough to compete with the upper half of the SEC. I think their defense, if they had a better offense, is good enough to compete in those games. But again, they're not going to win any track meets. They're not even going to win any back and forth games. versus the upper echelon of the SEC. Again, like I think people were hoping when Max Johnson came in, they were going to see a much more like efficient offense, more even explosive plays, and they maybe thought that, hey, we switched the quarterback. That was probably the problem. But again, going 10 for 20 for 140 yards and a touchdown and putting up, again, 17 points where last week they put up 10 points. I think it's going to be tough sledding for their offense against, and going down the stretch, it can't be tough sledding for their offense. And where I think teams are going to load up the box and try to have Max Johnson beat them through the air. And I don't see that being a winning formula. And when it comes to Miami, it's kind of what I thought Miami would do. I honestly thought they'd score a little bit more, but like Tyler Van Dyke in general, I think has maybe got a little bit too much hype from a preseason perspective, but has been decidedly average to below average. And I'll say below average, especially when you look at the expectations put on him. So again, Miami's a team that hasn't really won big games in recent years. And they clearly shit the bed here. So, it's maybe this will be the first year they can reach the ACC championship in their history, but I don't really see that.
It's just this whole situation with Miami is very, very funny to me because all the Miami fans, they get so cocky and arrogant every time something Miami, like the U is back and whatever. And, we went out and we got Mario Cristobal and he's assembling this great staff of great recruiters and great coaches, and Jason Taylor's on the staff and such, and Ed Reed is here and the Rock is donating money and they're paying a shitload of money in NIL because John Ruiz is going to just pay for everyone to go to Miami and the U is going to be back, and look at everything that Mario Cristobal is doing. And then you get into the game and you remember, this is one of the most conservative and bad game managers, and at least at the major level of coaching in college football. They're down 17-3. Their defense just gave up a touchdown, but it was the only drive that A&M had sustained at all, really, the entire game. And you have a 3rd and goal from the 6. You run the ball on 3rd down and then just kick the field goal to go from down 14 to down 11. This is the Mario Cristobal experience. This was a guy who never had a great offense with Justin Herbert as his quarterback, and that's what it is. Miami had 27 first downs and 0 touchdowns. Like, that seems impossible, and it basically is. It hasn't happened since at least 2000 when the data, as far back as the data goes. The A&M defense is legitimately good. Kudos to them. I mean, it was a tough week there. They suspended several players before the game, and shout out to Bet US, who hung props for Evan Stewart, the wide receiver. I bet his under when it was starting to leak out, like 3 hours after it was starting to leak out, that he wasn't going to play because he was going to be suspended, and they canceled my bet like a bunch of cowards. But the A&M defense is very good. It's been very good for a while. It was very good last year. It's very good now. You guys mentioned Max Johnson. Like, they're not really great on offense. Devin Achane and Anais Smith are awesome players, but that's really it for A&M. So they now have a game where you talk about weird things happening. Every time Arkansas and Texas A&M play, it's at Jerry Jones's palatial estate in Arlington. Weird things happen. A&M's a favorite. Again, we'll talk about it. I love Arkansas this week. That's it for big games. I have a few other thoughts. I think the first one that I want to get to and get your opinion on, Eastern Michigan 30, Arizona State 21, Herm Edwards era done. I don't know if he was actually fired on the field after the game, but it makes a great narrative. All I really have to say, though, is that this was an athletic department that hired Herm Edwards when things were normal. What's going to happen now that they have the NCAA violations hanging over their head? Obviously, the athletic director was his agent years ago, so you probably can't let him make this next hire a job that always seems like it has more potential than it ever plays out on the field. But if you're Michigan or if you're Arizona State, what do you guys do?
I don't know. I'm still not convinced. I said this earlier in the year, but I'm not convinced that Herm Edwards went there thinking he was giving a pump-up talk and then somehow ended up as the head coach of Arizona State. Like, I think he thought he was giving like a seminar talk. So I never thought that was such a strange hire to begin with. But again, this is going to be a program that's going to, I think we're going to see the fallout from this for the next like 4 to 5 years. Like, I think they're going to be like kind of a dead and buried program here for a while, unless somehow they land like a home run hire, because there is a lot of draw to Arizona State. It's like a sick campus, huge party campus. Like, Arizona is like the hot place to be right now. And so it's like, it shouldn't be that hard of a place to win a game because they can get anybody who has a pulse in the door too. They can probably get a bunch of JUCO transfers in. Like, it should be a place where recruiting is easy if you bring recruits on campus. And I'm sure there's some Arizona money floating around there, but it just hasn't happen. So unless they really somehow nail like a home run hire, and I don't know who that would be, if there's any huge alum coach that would go back and rally the troops, I think this is going to be a dead program for, at least 3 to 4 years.
Just hire Scott Frost. Dead program hires dead coach. Just do that. It's fine.
Honestly, he would be burnt to a crisp in that sun.
Yeah. I guess that is another point that I wanted to bring up. Shout out to, I think the hardest working man in all of sports right now is whoever is Bill O'Brien's agent, because Pete Thamel's list for Nebraska and Arizona State as potential coaches had Bill O'Brien on it. That said, it's been a decade since he's been a head coach in college football. But if you take if you put the situations in a vacuum, at least in terms of programs dealing with NCAA violation stuff, he did a pretty decent job, all things considered, at Penn State. I just don't think it would be a good hire. But, the more I thought about it, the more I was like, maybe not the worst idea in the world. The next one is I wanted to stick with coaches who are going to potentially be fired. We talked about Brian Harsin earlier. There's rumblings going around that Jeff Collins might be out at Georgia Tech already. Who knows? But this is what Lane Kiffin said after the game after the 42-0 Ole Miss win over Georgia Tech. Shout out to FanDuel for opening that line at 10.5 for some reason. I mean, you could have bet it at any number.
It made no sense.
But I'll take the 10.5 and never even have to worry about it even a little bit. Lane Kiffin said, quote, "I would have liked the opportunity to throw more with Luke, but having empathy for what was going on in that game on the other sideline and the hot seat or whatever he's on just didn't feel really like it was right, where if it was a couple score game, Luke would have gotten to throw more there." When an opposing coach is taking mercy on you because you're about to get fired, you're over, you're done, it's over with. I just saw that quote, and I thought that quote was fairly interesting.
Bring Deion to Tech.
Yeah, if there's one man who knows what it's going to take to win, and if there's a coach out there in college football who knows what it takes to succeed in Atlanta, it is the former Atlanta Falcon and former Atlanta Brave, Deion Sanders. Also just want to shout out the rough day in the middle of the Big Ten, Northwestern losing to Southern Illinois, who lost by 4 touchdowns to Incarnate Word. Indiana scraped by against Western Kentucky, a game they absolutely should have lost. Purdue should have won against Syracuse, but did not.
That was a fun game.
It was. That was definitely the best, top to bottom. Like the App State finish was the best.
Hell of a cover for my over in that one.
Ridiculous.
Syracuse, Purdue, the best game of the day, top to bottom, and then Rutgers, a 2-point win at Temple. Never betting Rutgers ever again in my life. I just also want to point out, almost an all-time meltdown from me on that Western Kentucky Indiana game.
You were waiting for it. I could tell. I think you were DMing us. You were tweeting about it. You were waiting to lose that bet.
So if you weren't paying attention, which you probably weren't because it was Indiana Western Kentucky.
That's correct.
I mentioned how their quarterback, Austin Reed, the Western Kentucky quarterback, said he's going to make some throws that are going to make you clench your butthole. And Western Kentucky was up 11 points. They were inside the red zone, and he threw an interception in the end zone that would have put them up 18 if they had scored on that drive. Indiana drives all the way down. They kick a field. What is the situation? They score a touchdown late in the game. They need to get the 2-point conversion. Tyson Helton, Clay Helton's less talented younger brother, calls 2 timeouts on the 2-point conversion instead of just saving them and maybe trying to throw the ball down the field to get in position to win the game. Goes to overtime. They miss a field goal. Thank God Indiana hit like a 47-yard, they were way behind the sticks after first down, and thank God they made the field goal, because then you get into Western Kentucky gets the ball first. Indiana would have gotten the ball first in the second overtime. They score. They get the 2-point conversion. They're up 8. They get a stop. Suddenly, every number is dead. Nevertheless, never betting on Western Kentucky again until this week when they play Florida International, one of the worst teams in college football. And my final thing I wanted to talk about, shout out to friend of the show, our good boy, everyone's good boy, Hudson the Dog, an Old Dominion. They had a chance to win that game, but Virginia drove down, kicked a game-winning field goal. But great teams do what, guys? Great teams cover. Old Dominion covered. And I told you my favorite bet, if you were going to play that game, was the Virginia team total under. Never had a chance whatsoever to go over. My instinct was right there. So shout out Hudson. We love you, buddy.
We're not going to do it this week, but I brought it up, Dan, at the beginning of the show before Phil was in. I want to bring it up to Phil. I think now that Hudson the Dog follows us on Twitter, we follow back. I think we need to have a Hudson Dog of the Week. It could be good dog, could be could be a bad, could be somebody that's lazy.
Like an underdog. But here's
it's whatever you want it to be, Dan. That's the beauty. Like that term It can be good, can be bad, could be underdog. It can be whatever you want it to be. And I think we do it on Tuesdays. It's from last week. I think that's a new segment alert.
See, I was thinking we do it on we can do it on Tuesdays. I'm good with that. I just don't want to put dog in a negative connotation here because we love Hudson. So I don't know if it's an underdog who did well, or we save it for Thursdays and we
good dog, bad dog.
We like every week. We'll discuss this off the air.
We'll talk about it. It's a working
I love
type.
it.
Before we get into, I have all of the lines for the games. I think I have 12 or 14 games, whatever, on the list of games to go over very quickly. What other thoughts do you guys have on the week? I guess the only thing we didn't really get to, LSU, Mississippi State. Brian Kelly got the win that he needed to. I didn't really think.
It was weird. I left that game like LSU got the win, and I still don't really think they're very good, and I still think they'll be about a 500 team. And I don't know, Mississippi State. It's just Mike Leach never really felt right to Mississippi State, and I think in about 2 years he'll be back coaching some Pac-12 school where he belongs at 11 o'clock at night.
Yeah, maybe Mike Leach in Nebraska.
No,
that would be hilarious.
No.
But I think my kind of final thoughts. First off, my third shout out, Holy Cross Crusaders and Dan's Holy Cross Crusaders this weekend, absolutely putting beating down on Yale. So Holy Cross is looking legit. They cracked the top 10. We messaged before. I think Holy Cross is a third round of the playoffs team. They're going to be good enough where they don't see a Dakota or a Montana until the third round. I hope, I pray.
That's what you're looking for.
So we'll see. But again, that was a big game for me. Final kind of one takeaway from the weekend, which we'll talk about a little bit, Florida just scraping by South Florida. I know it wasn't as close as the score indicated, but it kind of was. Anthony Richardson, does he stink?
Yeah.
What
happened in week one? What?
They played very well. I mean, he just played very well.
I know, but how is it so different now? I'm just.
Yeah,
it was also probably the most he's put on tape for any opposition in his career because he hadn't really played a ton before.
Maybe I know we'll get to that game too.
That other people get to see it. He's also a little banged up too. I think he's got a lower body injury of some kind that's hampering him a little bit. And if he's not a super effective runner, he's not a great passer. His most notable pass in that game against Utah was the one where he ran around and then juked the guy out and then threw the ball in the end zone. It wasn't like he was a superstar passer in that game. Again, we talked about with Michael Penix, it was big Penix energy, by the way. Robert Griffin III coined that one, which is pretty great. With Michael Penix 2 years ago, it was more about moments than stats. That was kind of what it was against Utah. I mean, he had good overall stats, but it was really he just had some big moments in that game that led them to that win. Yeah, that was a weird one, but yeah, you had that. There were some other ones that started to cut you off there.
No, I was just going to say, I know we'll get into their game this week, but they're 10.5-point dogs, and as unimpressive as they've been since that loss to Utah with that rivalry, I'm not touching it. That's
an absolute trap.
Yeah. Well, let's go ahead. We'll launch into the games. All of the current lines are provided via FanDuel just because it's easier for me I like their interface.
They have a good layout.
They have nothing personal. And this is going to go chronological until we get to Duke and Kansas, and then I'm going to kind of go all over the board.
Game of the week.
Starting. Game of the day. My Jayhawks. Big noon Saturday. Maryland at Michigan Open. Michigan -15. It's now currently 16.5 after getting as high as 17.5. Maryland is one of the least disciplined teams in college football. They had 15 penalties in their game against SMU. I'm not super eager to back a Maryland team that just doesn't look like they're firing on all cylinders and is not fundamentally sound and playing on the road. But hey, this is the first time Michigan's playing a team with any kind of pulse this year. So Phil, quick thoughts? What do you expect?
I'm staying away from this from a betting perspective. I generally think I like Michigan in this game, but because they haven't played anybody with a pulse so far, it's hard to tell. And it'll be interesting to see what happens at the quarterback situation at Michigan throughout the rest of the season when things aren't going smoothly. How long of a rope does JJ McCarthy have before they insert somebody else? So this Michigan team will be interesting to follow, despite them really just playing nobody so far and not really playing anybody else of the year. I think you have Talia Tagovailoa, who does have the opportunity to put up some big numbers, but I don't think it happens this week. I like Michigan. I like them to cover, but from a betting standpoint, this is the first sort of tell the truth week for Michigan slightly, but at the same time, their tell the truth week is versus a subpar Maryland team who I think scraped by last week versus SMU. So I haven't watched Maryland much, but have just looked at the scores and looked at who they've played and know that they also haven't played anybody really either. So at the same time, we'll see. I'm going to stay away from this game simply because we don't know who Michigan is. And even coming out of this week, I don't think it, I wouldn't be surprised if it's a 10-point game, but I also wouldn't be surprised if Michigan wins like 48-14. It's something where I like Michigan's defense. I like what I've seen from JJ McCarthy. I think he makes the offense more dynamic. But again, versus UConn, does that tell you anything? Versus Hawaii, does it tell you anything? It doesn't. So at the same time, it's going to take till like a few more weeks for learn about the week Michigan. So it'll be more interesting to watch them this week. I think, but that's all I can say. It's going to be more interesting to learn a little bit more about Michigan this week.
Yeah, I think I like Michigan to cover. I think this is a game that they probably steamroll because, well, this is their first quote unquote test of the season. It's still not really much of a test. I mean, Maryland's going to be a team that's battling to make a bowl game this year. They get them at home. I think Maryland might score a few points early because Michigan's really going up against their first legitimate offense, but I don't think Maryland's defense will be able to stop Michigan at all. So I would lean towards like a first half over, or maybe Maryland covering a first half line because they can score a little bit. But I think Michigan probably rolls through this one and wins something like 45-17, 45-21, something like that. I think they would pretty easy.
Yeah, I'll say anything less than a Michigan cover is probably an eye-opening result for Michigan. I don't have a thought one way or another. If I had to pick, I'd probably go Michigan. Clemson at Wake Forest. Clemson opened a 10-point favorite down to 7.5. This is a ranked versus ranked game, so I'll save all of my thoughts for it on Thursday, but I already have Clemson minus 7.5. This spread should be double digits.
Yeah, I hope it's not. I hope this is a Sam Hartford coming out game because I want to see Dabo lose. But at the same time, like Wake Forest has not been impressive. So I have some more thoughts later this week. But I'm excited again, similar to Michigan, I'm excited to see Clemson play a real team this week.
Yeah, Wake's offense is going to have to be perfect. If they are perfect, I think they'll win the game because I don't think Clemson can score with Wake's offense firing on all cylinders. The problem is we just haven't really seen it firing on all cylinders. Maybe now that, Hartman has a game or two under his feet and he's kind of in the thick of things, maybe we see it get a little bit better. But, I hope they cover, but this one feels like Clemson kind of just dominates because they have the dudes and Wake Forest has a dude at quarterback, and that's about it.
Yeah, like I said, I'll save my thoughts for all of it because I can go deeper into why I don't think that this is going to be a super competitive game. Baylor at Iowa State. Jack Trice will be rocking. I think Iowa State's 3-0 for just like the second time this century or third time or something crazy like that. Maybe I'll do a little bit more research on that and have the actual number. Open 2.5. Iowa State minus 2.5. Still Iowa State minus 2.5. I have no idea. I'm going to have to really dig in on this because this is going to be kind of like Iowa State was not expected to be good. And it would be I guess I'll say this, it would be kind of ironic if this was a team that was supposed to win the Big 12 last year and be a dark horse for the playoff and had a really, really bad underachieving season. And now this year they were expected to be one of the worst teams in the Big 12 and to actually be competitive would be a very Matt Campbell thing. But I'll do some digging, but I don't really have any thoughts on this one.
I like Dave Aranda versus Matt Campbell. Like, I think Baylor's going to find a way to win this game. Like, Matt Campbell's not a big game winning coach. He gets hyped up like crazy. Again, I don't have too much on this game. I haven't watched Iowa that much. I mean, their Iowa State game was pretty painful to say the least. But I like the better coach in this situation. I think Iowa's probably getting too overhyped, and now they're going to finally get some hype and then let everybody down.
Yeah, I got to be honest with you. I saw this line, and I was very confused as to why Baylor was an underdog. I've been pretty impressed with Baylor. I don't think Iowa State's done anything. Plus, if we're being honest, pretty big look-ahead spot for Iowa State going to Lawrence, Kansas next week. So you can't overestimate that.
All right. Florida, Tennessee, we mentioned it. Florida at Tennessee. This opened at Tennessee minus 3.5 a long time ago. It is now up to 10.5.
Terrible.
Kudos to anyone who got this number. Tennessee under 10. I think it was like minus 8 or so on Sunday, or at least the end of last week. Kind of wish I had jumped on it now. It has reached the point where, and we'll talk more about this game in depth, potentially with a friend of mine who's a big Tennessee guy on Thursday. I'll talk to you guys after we get off the air. But yeah, 10.5 probably about right. Like, this is one of those where I don't really want to bet it because of the history, but it feels like a game Tennessee should win by between 10 and 14 points.
Yeah, I mean, you talked about it before with, Josh Heupel needing to exercise the demons. Like, as good as they're better than Florida. They should win. Their offense is electric. It's fantastic. It should be able to put up 40 or 50 points this week at home. But this isn't the first time that Tennessee's been the quote-unquote better team, and they should be able to score and should like. I want to bet Tennessee. I want to believe in Tennessee. I think college football is a better place when Tennessee's a pretty good team, or at least competitive in that SEC. But I want to see it. I hope we see it. It's 10.5 was just staying away from it, I think.
Yeah, this line just feels like a trap. I'm being honest. Like it absolutely feels like a trap, being like, yeah, well, Tennessee should. But it's like, I think Florida will kind of see. Again, they played like garbage the last couple weeks. And Anthony Richardson hasn't been good, but it's like a situation where if he starts running all over Tennessee's defense, you never know. Or he could just, shit in his hand again this week. So again, I am curious to see where this line ends up by the end of the week.
Yeah, I don't know there's going to be a ton of movement on it from here. I think it's probably in the right spot. Oregon at Washington State opened Oregon -6.5, still Oregon -6.5. Just put this on here because it's like I talked about earlier with the Pac-12. All of the, like any road game against an Oregon State, a Washington State, or a Washington suddenly becomes a lot more difficult for the USCs, the Utahs, and the Oregons of the world. So potentially just a bloodbath developing there. Big opportunity for Jake Dickert and Washington State to get a big home win. I mean, I'll just put this out there. They're undefeated, I believe, right? They haven't lost yet.
Yeah, correct.
If they beat Oregon, if they pull off the upset with wins over Oregon and Wisconsin, this is probably a team that should be ranked in the top 15 at this point because we don't know who's good.
Yeah, and this is going to be a big Cameron Ward game. So this is a game where I had looked at Washington State as the Pac-12 spoiler this year. And this is a spot where they can be that first spoiler, but then it's like, what are they, a spoiler? Or are they actually good? So it comes, if they come and they do win this game, it turns from, hey, they could be a spoiler to Utah, to Oregon, to USC, to maybe they're actually good. But again, I think you look at Cameron Ward, who's put up some solid numbers this year, 8 touchdowns, 3 picks, close to 800 yards. Again, he played against a really good Wisconsin defense, and they kind of eked that game out. So this could be a, depending on the uniform combo, could be a good uniform game.
Love this uniform game.
Yeah,
I hope Oregon doesn't ruin it, but I love this uniform
green versus
game.
The Maroons. I think hopefully Oregon goes like super hard into the green, and Washington State does some maroon gray combos because just a good color game.
I'd like to see Oregon with the white helmet, white jersey, and then the green pants like from the Georgia game, like the really bright green.
Give me the old school Ducks. Give me the old cool SCO Duck.
I'd like those with the orange face mask. I'd like that a lot.
Yeah.
I think that'd be a good
Give me the old Duck.
This is going to be a really fun test, I think, for both teams, because if this was at Oregon, I would think Oregon was going to win fairly easily. The fact that Washington State has this game at home, they have some big game experience going on the road, beating Wisconsin. Excuse me, not Washington. If Washington State's able to do what they want offensively and Cam Ward gets cooking, like Bo Nix is going to have to throw the football to keep up, and that's when Oregon starts to get into trouble. So if Washington State's able to execute early and kind of be able to run their game plan, Oregon might get into a point where playing catch-up is trouble for them. I still like Oregon, I think, in this game, but this is a really, really intriguing matchup, especially with Washington State getting it at home at Pullman.
The next game, there's a link in our private chat, and I just like, what is that? To the uniforms. The next one, Arkansas, Texas A&M neutral site. Like I mentioned, Jerry World in Arlington. This opened A&M -9, and this was the look ahead months ago, all the way down to 2.5. All I will say is I love this spot for Arkansas. Absolutely love it. Texas A&M does not want the wampum that's coming their way on Saturday in Arlington. That's not necessarily the truth. This game is just always a weird, wacky game, even in years when A&M was very good and Arkansas wasn't.
I'm excited to watch it.
This tends to happen in this game. I will give you a teaser. I do think I have my ridiculous bet of the week planned out, and it does involve the money line of this game in a parlay. I will explain more on Thursday.
I like Arkansas in this game. That's all I'm going to say, because I think Texas A&M's offense is going to stink again. And I think Arkansas survived a scare this week. clearly looking ahead, but they did win that game, so they come undefeated. I think they're going to be wildly hyped for this game. It was clear during this last week that this is all they've been focusing on, all they've been thinking about. This is going to be hopefully what I think is going to be a really big win. I think like a 9 to 12 point win for the Razorbacks.
Yeah, if Arkansas can score even a little bit against what's a pretty darn good A&M defense, but if they can get things moving and put up like 24, 31 points, like I don't think A&M stands a chance. I really like Arkansas on this one. I kind of started the week more leaning towards A&M, but just the more I kind of take a look at it, like A&M can't really score. Arkansas is not great defensively, but they're fine. Like I don't. Weird things happen in this game in Jerry World, like you were saying, but I like Arkansas. I think their offense is just going to be too much.
Also, is it a home game for Arkansas? No, I'm saying Jerry. I'm saying at Jerry.
Yeah, I mean, no.
Jerry, you think Jerry's he's gonna probably pull some shenanigans against Texas A&M, like turn off like their toilets in their locker room or something.
Jerry's gonna rig the coin toss so A&M's receivers are looking into the sunlight coming in the fourth quarter. Like
I think it's a is it?
I thought it was no the 2:30.
It's
the
a prime time
game. Because it's the 2:30 game is Florida. Tennessee,
yeah, the Florida Tennessee is the CBS game this week, so I believe that's a primetime game. So maybe early on you might have some sun poking through the window. The next one, I forgot to mention this in my recap. Shout out to the two teams that I absolutely detest and don't like: Wisconsin and Iowa. My first half team total under parlay hits. Iowa, Nevada, no doubt. Wisconsin, not so much. New Mexico State did miss a 29-yard field goal, so thank the
college kickers.
Nevertheless, Wisconsin, they hit the road to face a buzzsaw. The Ohio State Buckeyes opened 18, I think ticked down a little bit, but back up to 17 and a half. As far as I'm concerned, if I were to bet it, I probably think that there's just Ohio State's probably just going to be able to pull away in this game. But yeah, I mean, we'll see.
Yeah, I love Ohio State in this one.
Same.
It feels like Wisconsin always gets overvalued in these because networks try to overhype this as a big time showdown matchup. In years past, it kind of has been, but the fact that we're at Ohio State, like I don't think Wisconsin's going to be able to keep up. They can't throw the football. Ohio State defensively is good enough with Jim Knowles like to be able to game plan and take Braylon Allen out of it. Not totally, but as much as they possibly can. And I don't think Graham Mertz is going to be able to throw to nearly keep up with this Ohio State offense.
Yeah, if this was last year, I would not hate Wisconsin in this spot with Braylon Allen, but it's not last year; it's this year. So I think they're just going to absolutely stack the box and be like, "Hey, Graham Mertz, can you beat us?" And the answer is no. So that's it.
I think the more I think about it, the more the look that might actually end up on my card, it might be the under in this game. And it's simply a matter of
Wisconsin won't score.
Wisconsin's defense due to Ohio State, what Notre Dame, something along the lines of what Notre Dame was able to do to really get after them. Maybe Ohio State has figured some things out, obviously blowing out some bad teams. And since then, so maybe that was just week one jitters or whatever it was for Ohio State in that matter. Kansas State on the road at Oklahoma. -12 was the opener. Oklahoma now out to a 12.5 point favorite. This one actually I do think out of either 13.5 or 14 before coming back down. Oklahoma, a 12.5 point favorite. And I don't care how bad Kansas State was against Tulane. I don't care how much Adrian Martinez sucks. Ask Oklahoma fans what team confounds that program the most. And for whatever reason, for the last few years, it's been Kansas State. I think they've won 2 of the last 4, which I mean is winning 2 games in 4 years against a team might not seem that great.
With where those programs are.
Very good, and I think one of them, one of the losses was a blowout, but I think one was a 7-point game. Whatever reason, they have had a hex on Oklahoma. But other than that, like realistically in the real world, this is something that should favor Oklahoma. I don't really have a favor one way or another.
Yeah, is this the ghost of Adrian Martinez revenge game? Like I think this will be like his like legacy game where he'll do exactly what Adrian Martinez generally does, which is like play pretty well and then just throw a crippling late game interception. So I see this one being close, but then again I see Adrian Martinez throwing a late game crippling interception. But this should be a good game because as you mentioned, this is always a good game. So that's it.
I probably like Oklahoma up until 14 or 13.5. I think once you get to that 14.5 is where I start to be worried. They have been the thorn in Oklahoma's side for the last few years, but I think with the new coaching staff, I think we're talking about exercising demons a lot. Maybe this is exercise demons week if we're naming every week, but I think this is a chance for Oklahoma to do that. And I think they exercised a Nebraska demon last week. Not that they had lost to Nebraska recently, but that was just kind of a rival, and they didn't play well last year. I think they exercised that demon. I think they kind of do the same this week. I think they're going to kind of really get it rolling here.
The next one, USC on the road at Oregon State, open USC -6, now 6.5. Maybe finally we're going to get to see what USC is made of in a game. We were hoping we were going to get to see that from Fresno State. Even before the Jake Haener injury, I don't think Fresno State is that good this year compared to where they were last year. I think the offense in particular took a step back without Kalen DeBoer, unfortunately. Oregon State's not going to blow you away, but they're going to be a very well-coached team. They absolutely demolished Montana State this past weekend, and Montana State was severely limited on offense in that game, but they just moved around a very good FCS defense like there was nothing there. Again, Oregon State doesn't have anything that's going to blow your hair back, but a well-coached team, a team that we know last year in particular played very, very well at home, going to be a very interesting test for USC.
I like that. I'm just most excited this game that it's at Oregon State. And that it's going to be a test for USC. And again, similar to not quite to the extent of maybe more of an extent to Michigan, that we'll learn a little bit more about USC this week, which is exciting because they do have they're the kind of the new shiny toy. And so it's exciting to see if some of the polish wears off this week when they play a pretty good defense in a road environment. And so I hope they get stress tested. But again, from a betting perspective, I think I like USC here. But it's just, again, a little bit tell the truth week to see a little bit more what USC is made of.
Yeah, I think this is a game that we get to the fourth quarter and it's still not decided yet, whereas USC's games up until this point have been decided by that point. I do think USC is the better team, but Oregon State does a really good job of, one, covering at home. We learned that. Yep. And two, they're not really going to beat themselves at home. I think they're going to make USC really beat them, and I think that's going to give them a chance in the fourth quarter. And if USC's defense and offensive line play mistake-free football and Caleb Williams plays mistake-free football, well, USC is going to win that game. But if if Oregon State's able to come away with one or two big turnovers, that's one to watch out, because I don't think Oregon State's going to beat themselves. I think they're going to make USC do it.
And the biggest game of the week, the rightful site of College Game Day this week, Lawrence, Kansas, undefeated Duke at undefeated Kansas, open Kansas -7.5, still Kansas -7.5. Probably would take Kansas if I was going to bet this game. Might just throw some money on the over just for shits and giggles because that's what we all want. I would probably benefit Kansas if they stopped falling down 14-0 at the start of every game. But look, I mean, after they fell down 14-0 against West Virginia, they were clearly the better team. After they went down 14-0 against Houston, they were clearly the better team. I'm strongly considering a bet on Kansas in this game. I don't know. What do you guys think?
It's just the battle of the unbeatens, which is like we all predicted, Duke versus Kansas. And I think I read somewhere, this is like the first time Kansas has been favored at home versus a Power 5 team in like a very long.
I think it's 2009. I think I saw that same note. I believe it was 2009.
Yeah. So again, this would be a game where, like, at the beginning of the season, this would be like our joke, like sickos game of the week. Like, only idiots would want to watch this game. But now it's like an intriguing matchup simply because it's like, hey, that's going to be a good game. It's like Kansas. And it's, again, we got some blue on blue crime coming down. And this is like a clear football school team game.
I've been talking about it since the Big 12 season preview. I'm going to officially put in my Kansas football and Kansas basketball money line parlay over Duke. I can't wait. I'm looking forward to it.
I love it. Oh, God, I love that so much.
I do like Kansas in this game. I think they're playing really well. I know they've started slow, so I might roll the dice and wait till mid first quarter, see if Duke gets on the board early and that line jumps down a little bit. But I like Kansas in this one.
Well, if Duke scores early, then that means that Kansas should probably be favored by more at that point, the way their last couple of games have gone. The next one on the list, Minnesota at Michigan State. We talked about it. The one thing I'll say, Michigan State, like, Minnesota runs the ball well, doesn't pass the ball well, whatever. Michigan State opened a 3-point favorite when this opened. It is now completely flipped, almost mirror the other way. Minnesota, a 2.5-point favorite on the road. I'm just interested to see if Tanner Morgan can actually throw the ball against a bad secondary. Because this is a bad secondary still, it really is. And you would think that Michigan State would at least try to stop the run in this game. So that's kind of what I want to see here.
I'm excited to see Minnesota run the ball in this game, to be honest. and see how OBrien gets off the ground. And again, it's like, Michigan State like hadn't played anybody. They got smoked by Oregon. I think this is the pretty evenly matched teams, which is like, I think middle of the roadish Big Ten teams. And so again, this opens up a really hard stretch for Michigan State, in my opinion. And this game was one that when the season opened, they probably a little bit glossed over, but you'd say they're on upset watch, but you just mentioned Minnesota's favored by 2.5 right now. So it's, go Gophers.
I mean, it's I don't want to call it like a must-win game for Michigan State, but like it's kind of, if you want to make a bowl. No, I mean, it's kind of a must-win game.
Yeah, it's kind of.
They got Ohio State. They got Wisconsin, who like that's a tough match. That's gonna be an interesting matchup for them. At Michigan, close out the season at Penn State. Like this is a pretty big win for them. Pretty big game for them in order to ensure bowl eligibility. I still kind of like them in this game. I think I like that they started out as favorites too, because I think that means Vegas kind of likes them as well. I like Minnesota. I think they're a very good football team, but like I need to see them do it against the actual competition. They've been really, really impressive, similar to Michigan, similar to, in lesser extent, USC, but they've been really good at absolutely demolishing and dominating bad opponents. They've been able to run the ball as easily as they wanted to. Michigan State's going to present the challenge for them to move the ball on the ground, and if they can do that consistently, if Tanner Morgan can prove that he can do enough through the air to win a tough conference road game against a Michigan State team that might have a bad secondary, but is always a tough team to play and a tough place to play, like that's a very important test for me to actually buy into Minnesota as kind of the favorites in that Big Ten West. So I'm interested to see how they come out this week, because I think they're going to be able to run the ball okay, but they're not just going to be able to turn around and hand it off. Tanner Morgan's going to have to make some throws.
Well, I guess we can leave this off of our big game list because you guys just kind of crushed the analysis there. I only have 3 more on the list. Just quickly, this next one, I only put this on the list because since I do all of the lines here, I want to claim this as my off the radar game of the week. James Madison. I'll let you have this one, Phil.
No, it's yours. It's yours. Take the Dukes. I'll find one. Okay.
I was going to say, because like that also leaves me the opportunity to find some service dog mascot related shenanigans for mine. But James Madison at Appalachian State, of course, App State coming off of 2 huge wins, a 7-point favorite App State after it opened at 10. Haven't done a ton of research yet. Just kind of an interested, show me what you've got as a new FBS team, James Madison, against the team that probably should win that conference, although there's some sentiment out there of people that I know who are smart who think that South Alabama is probably worth a few bucks to win.
Watch out for Marshall
conference. Right. On my end, real quick, and I think we're just, like we said earlier, we're just going to throw our teams on here every week because they always are going to end up playing interesting games. Texas at Texas Tech. Texas opened a 5-point favorite, is now up to 6.5, which scares the hell out of me. But honestly, tell you, if there's a look that I like in this game, it's probably the under. I think Texas Tech's defense has been a little bit froggier than people expected. They are making opposing offenses work very hard to get what they want. Texas's offense still a bit banged up, and their defense started slowly against UTSA, but really made some nice adjustments in the second half to cover in a game that was tied at halftime, and they managed to cover any number there. And then the last one, I'll just ask.
What's that total, Dan, in Texas Tech?
Stand by. Let me see if I can find it real quick.
Sorry, I thought you might have had that off the top of your head because I really like that underlane.
Yeah, I mean, it's just one of those things where Texas ran the ball well, but it was also on the back of a couple of big chunk plays. They had a couple of really long touchdown runs in that game. Really struggling to establish the line of scrimmage over the course of the entire game. They still don't really trust Hudson Card a ton to throw the ball. I wonder if they were trying to be a little bit vanilla to keep some things away from conference opponents, because they do have to manage things until Quinn Ewers gets back. It is a 59.5 point total to the over. Just the under, rather. You can get the under at just the over, rather. The under is minus 105 if you want there. So maybe, if you were to tell me that game was going to end like 28-24, which would get you the under, I wouldn't be surprised at all. Then the last one on the list before we wrap the show, although I am going to give out a bet, by the way, once we're done here, because I do have one bet to give out today. Notre Dame, North Carolina, open 6.5. Let me just ask, are you guys worried Notre Dame a favorite in this game on the road?
Yes, but this is for me from an outsider's if I was taking an outsider's perspective, super interesting matchup game. Simply, it's really good offense versus really good defense, and then really bad offense versus really good defense. So it's a situation where it's like, horrible. Each team has one glaring error and they're flipped. Yeah. So like, could that be like a points fest? Could it be an under fest? Just an interesting matchup. But yes, I am worried. I think Notre Dame settled in much better in the second half, found a little bit more running the ball. I think if there's ever a get right week for their offense, it's this week. The problem is it's a very difficult week for their defense. So again, this game could go any which way whatsoever. And this does scare me being a favorite on the road versus UNC.
It is a don't go anywhere near this line, this total. This is the complete avoid bet because, like you said, Phil, anything can happen. I'm encouraged by what we saw from Notre Dame in the second half. It seemed like they found a little bit of an identity offensively. They were able to establish the run. The offensive line was able to give Drew Pine some time. Drew Pine looked a little bit more confident. Granted, didn't have to make many big throws, but the couple he was asked to, he did step up and make. I'm also interested to see if kind of on their side of things, now that the monkey's off their back and they got that win and they're not quite squeezed the football as tight and they're not quite playing it, a little bit too tight. See if they loosen up, see if they get a little better. If they play more like they did in the second half, I think they're going to win the game because I think they're going to be able to run the football. And those two edge rushers and Foskey and how do you pronounce it, Phil? I always forget the other two's name.
Ademilola.
That's it. If they can get after the passer like they did against Cal, I think they're going to have an okay time and put Drake May under pressure, force him into some throws. But it's going to have to be that second half team because if we see the team that showed up in the first half against Cal and the team that showed up against Marshall, I think North Carolina wins by double digits. So it kind of depends on which Notre Dame team we see.
Also, quick breaking news. Ohio State is wearing, again, kind of weird blackout uniforms versus.
Why? Like, I hate that so much.
It's going to look sick when they're just absolutely running up and down the field.
They're still wearing silver helmets?
No, they're black helmets. But the Buckeyes are red. It's going to look cool.
It's going to look cool.
It's better. It's those. I don't love those uniforms, but they're better than the Urban Meyer alternates where they had the red, the silver, and then like the weird like charcoal gray helmets. They wore them in the Michigan game that JT Barrett didn't get the first down, but they gave it to him, and then Ohio State ripped out Michigan's heart. But I hated those. But I don't love the alternate uniform for Ohio State, but these are at least acceptable. They do look cool at night.
Yeah. I think these ones are
good. Breaking news.
Yeah. On that note, so I looked it up while you guys were talking. North Carolina, 27th in the country in EPA per play offense, 115th in EPA per play defense. Notre Dame, 97th in the country in EPA per play offense, and 62nd in EPA per play defense, which maybe because Ohio State was able to move the ball on them a little bit in the second half. I have no idea. Nevertheless, who knows? Interesting thought. And the last thing from me before we go, because Matt and I have a meeting in 9 minutes because we've talked so long. I do have one bet, and I want to give this out now because this is one of the Thursday night games. Virginia Tech hosting West Virginia. The total 52.5 in Blacksburg. Bet the under. Virginia Tech is an all defense, zero offense game. They're an underdog at home on a Thursday night, and the total is 52.5. If they're going to win this game, which I think they probably will find a way to do. So I don't even hate, like, if you want to get super squirrely and really want to find like a plus money thing, a Virginia Tech money line under 52.5 parlay there because it feels like a correlated outcome to me. But Virginia Tech cannot score. It is going to be a raucous environment because it is always a raucous environment there. I don't think West Virginia is particularly very good either. Anything north of 50, 51 is probably playable as far as I'm concerned. I would expect another ugly game. The unders have hit in every Virginia Tech game so far this season, and they are hitting at about 10 points per game under what the total is. So I would expect that trend to probably continue here in Blacksburg on Thursday night. I have no idea if that's going to move. And if that number moves between now and Thursday when we do our show at 2:00, want to give you plenty of time to get that pick locked in.
That could not be a more perfect Thursday night game. That West Virginia Tech belongs on Thursday night. That's a perfect Thursday night game. I love it.
Absolutely. So that's all I have. Do you guys have anything else before we wrap it up?
Nope.
I'm all good. We'll be back on Thursday to preview all of the big games this week, our off-the-radar games. Probably invite my friend Cliffy C to come talk some Tennessee football with us and probably some other SEC games because the Arkansas A&M game's also very interesting. So we will be back on Thursday. For Matt, for Phil, I'm Dan. We will talk to you then.